Welcome to the Shudder. I've got two viewer submissions for you. The first is from Ben. It's a short encounter story, but the effects are quite lasting for him and his son. The second is from Donnie Miller, and it's one of those you get a good glean into how these creatures can hurt us in more ways than one. Okay, procure that worn out end of the couch and settle in. It was mid-August 2018 in Amherst, Maine on the Union River. My son and I went fishing/camping and were planning to spend a few days in the woods. We have fished there many times. We paddled upriver from where we unloaded, set up camp, and then proceeded to paddle another mile up and fish the current back to camp. At about 6 p.m., I cooked dinner and we ate while I kept our lines out in front of the camp. Without warning, a rock bigger than a basketball comes flying in from the other side and lands in the middle of the river. Now, the Union River has a few wide sections, but for the most part, it's about 25 feet wide and maybe 3 feet deep. We were quite stunned and both just stood there frozen. Soon after, I noticed there wasn't a sound to be heard. No birds, no crickets, nothing. My son, who was 12 at the time, says, "Dad, it's right there looking at us." It took me a few seconds to see what he was seeing, but when I did, I met eyes with what I can only describe as a Sasquatch. At this time, my son, who hadn't held my hand in a few years, grabbed mine and held it tight. My heart was starting to pound so loud, it sounded as if it was right between my ears. Every part of me wanted to move, but I was frozen for what felt like forever. Here's this animal that science says doesn't exist and is staring right into my eyes. It was crouched behind a large rock, so we didn't get the full view of it until it stood up. It had to be at least 7 feet or so. My son said, "Dad, I'm scared. I want to go." I had already been thinking the same. It didn't make any threatening moves, yet I had this intense feeling we were in danger. My adrenaline has never spiked so high. I just left everything there, grabbed my son and the kayaks, and started paddling back to the car. It slowly followed us most of the way back. At that point, it was getting close to dark, so I didn't care about the tent, fishing, or camping gear. We made it to the car, loaded up kayaks, and drove the 25 minutes home. The next morning, we decided to go retrieve our gear if it wasn't destroyed, which it wasn't. The only thing messed with was the frying pan. It was knocked off the grate and scraped clean. We paddled over to where it was and found 7 footprints in the mud that were much longer and wider than my size 10.5 boot. I tried to match the stride, but it was too long. Now, I had grown up seeing the Patterson film and was always a hopeful believer. I mean, how cool would that be, right? Now that I've seen with my own 2 eyes, words just can't convey the experience. Since then, I've spent a lot of time in the Amherst Mountains and surrounding woods and have found a few tree breaks and 1 print, but have yet to see one of these creatures again. Thank you for sending that in, Ben. This next account was sent to me by Donnie Miller. Now, it's one of the better examples of the trauma that can be involved in encountering a Sasquatch. I talked to Donnie on the phone before I asked him to write this down and to let me tell it here, and I could hear it in his voice. This encounter has had a lasting effect on him, and it's not the kind of encounter you really wish for. This is what happened. Back in April of 2011, I was working with local farmers in Marianna, Florida, in the eradication of wild hogs that were destroying their crops. One of the farms I was working with was approximately 240 acres. These larger farms had serious problems due to the large population of wild hogs, thus requiring that we use a multitude of means removing them. This particular farm was comprised of 3 fields separated by a very small stream and extremely thick foliage. Entering the fields, I would drive into a small 20-acre field, then turning north to another larger field surrounded by hardwoods and patches of swampland. Going east across the small field brought me back to a short 2-trail dim road approximately 100 yards long. This 2-trail road consisted of 2 sandy tire tracks with grass growing between them. It was made by the farmer's tractor traveling to and from the largest of the 3 fields. Both sides of this 2-trail were solid walls of briars, grapes, blackberries, and heavy leaves, limbs, and foliage. It was so thick that none of us were ever able to get through it. The far end of the 2-trail road had a small muddy stream crossing it, about ankle deep and about 1.5 feet wide. I had a large hog trap set up on the far side of the largest peanut field, and I needed to check the trap to be sure there was still water in it and to exterminate any hogs that may be trapped. At around 10 o'clock on this hot April night, I decided to go check the trap. The only person I could find that was willing to go with me was Lisa. I had her drive my car so that I could jump out and get to the trap. If there were any hogs in it, she could drive the car closer while I dragged them to it. We arrived and she drove around the first little field and parked the car on the beginning of the 2-trail road. My Toyota Tercel wouldn't have been able to cross the muddy stream at the far end, so I exited on the start of the 2-trail. Lisa stayed inside the car because it was hot outside and the mosquitoes were horrible. I started down the trail toward the field where the hog trap was located. I carried a fanny pack with the bare essentials, a headlamp, and my trusty 7mm short magnum bolt-action rifle. As I was walking down the 2-trail, I could hear footsteps in the leaves to my left, about 20 feet away. When I stopped walking, it would also stop, but it would take that one extra step. This continued down the entire length of the road. I was quite freaked out, but convinced myself it was either a hog or a coyote. When I made it to the stream, I stopped and took a big step to get over it. As soon as I planted my foot on the leaves on the other side of the stream, I heard a low rumbly sound. The crunching of the leaves I stepped on muffled the sound I was hearing, so I thought it was a mother hog giving her babies a warning call, which sounds like a long and low, drawn-out grunt. Another 15 feet, and I was standing in the peanut plants about 12 inches high. I watched the tree line where I heard that sound and waited a brief time, hoping to see a hog step out, but nothing did. I headed across the large field to check the trap. There were no hogs in it, so I headed back to the car. These peanut fields are seriously full of copperhead moccasins and rattlesnakes, so I keep my headlamp turned toward the ground about 6 feet in front of me. I only use the low beam setting so I can get the most out of the batteries. I made it back to the 2-trail road, and when I got to the stream and was about to step across it, I heard that rumbly sound again. This time, I knew without a doubt what that sound was. It was a growl. This wasn't from any animal that I'm familiar with, but I remember what my brother-in-law told me about bears. I've never encountered a bear in any of my 50 years, so I was recalling what I was told. I stood there, motionless, hoping this bear didn't pick up on me. Seconds later, I was smelling the most awful rank odor I'd ever smelled. My brother-in-law said that bears stink really bad, and that was exactly what I was experiencing. I smelled an odor that consisted of several different but very distinctive smells. From stinky feet to rotten flesh, this odor physically burned my nostrils to the point that my eyes were watering. I put it together in my mind. It's growling and it stinks horribly. I've got a bear about 20 feet from me on this dark trail. I focused on the 2 tire tracks and slowly started taking baby steps on the track opposite of the side of the trail I believed the bear was on. This bear started walking the same direction I was going. He was paralleling me. Then the growling got loud, It would have a deep, gurgling sound when it inhaled, and a very deep growl with the exhale. It sounded like he was growling from deep within a barrel. I started walking faster toward the car, but he did too. Then, everything went to a different level of fear for me. He wasn't only paralleling me, but he was also coming toward me. Every step almost thudded as it crunched through the layer of dead leaves and limbs, growling and gurgling continuously. I'm absolutely horrified of bears, unnaturally horrified of them, and now one is about to step through this wall of greenery right by my backside. Then the unthinkable finally happened. This bear broke through the wall of thicket. I immediately froze in place, hoping that he would cross the 2 trail and be on his way. This was not the case. This bear was around 10 feet behind me from the way it sounded. He was growling aggressively and gurgling with every long, drawn-out inhale. I even thought I could feel the hair on the back of my neck moving with every growl. Before I could get my mind working to figure a way out of it, I heard a loud thud and felt the earth shake beneath my boots. I was thinking, now what do I do? I've had wild hogs run off after being shot with a 12-gauge slug at point-blank distance, never to find them. So what can a 300-pound bear take? I'm too afraid to shoot him from this close of a distance, and I have only one way out. I finally decided to slowly turn toward him so I could get the rifle pointed in his direction, just in case it comes to firing on him. Then I hear the thud, and the ground shakes again. Now I'm not able to turn my head far enough to see what's behind me due to breaking my neck in 2005, so I have to turn from the waist. I had to lift my feet until my toes were pointed toward the wall of foliage, then twist at the waist until I could face him. The growling and gurgling were happening continuously, as well as the thuds every few seconds. When I was finally turned enough to see the peanuts in the field behind me, I fell into confusion. The moon was bright that night, so the peanuts were brightly lit up. I should have been able to see the field at the end of this narrow road, but I couldn't. Everything was blacked out. I could just see something behind me, something black, but couldn't understand what was happening. Then, another loud growl that filled my lungs with the odor of hot fermented oranges. But this growl came from overhead. My headlamp was still set to hit the ground at 6 feet in front of me, so it was shining low. I leaned my upper body back to raise the point of illumination of my headlamp, and my heart almost stopped. There, just a few feet in front of me, was a giant caveman. He had both arms at his side, but elbows bent 90 degrees, with his hands balled into fists and pointing at me. He would sling his fist toward the ground and stomp his foot at the same time, shaking the very earth I stood on. I tried to understand how a bear could look like a man. I was lost and confused. I was looking into the eyes of a caveman. Large flat teeth, flat nose, big eyebrow ridge, very chiseled facial bones, and hands with 5 fingers. This was a caveman, and yes, he was male, undeniably. My head was midway up his stomach, and I'm 5'9", so I estimate this creature to be at least 9 feet. Now, I'm flashing every imaginable thought possible through my mind. How do I escape? I'm physically disabled. I can't run due to spinal and hip injuries, and I'm 60 yards from my car. I slowly turned back toward the car and began to slide my feet in that direction. Now he's really getting louder with the growling and gurgling, so much it sounded like he had serious lung issues. I remembered my headlamp and slowly tilted it toward the chrome bumper and headlight rings that were reflecting in the moonlight. I started clicking the mode button, causing the light to go through all the modes of low, medium, high, red, and green lights. Then it would start over again. I cycled it at least 3 times before Lisa finally saw it. She turned on the headlights, then the high beams, then started screaming, "Run! Run, Donnie!" and flashing the lights from high to low vigorously, then blowing the horn. That's when this giant caveman broke into a run, tearing through limbs and trees like a high-speed dozer. I made it to the car safely, then jumped in the front seat with all my gear on me, including my rifle. I asked Lisa if she could see that thing. She yelled at me saying, "That was no freaking bear. That was a man, the biggest freaking man I've ever seen." She said that from where she was sitting, 60 yards in front of me, she could see his entire upper body above my head, from the center of his abdomen area to the top of his head. She also described his mouth partially open and him swinging his fist toward the ground while stomping his foot. On the ride home, she agreed with me when I told her it looked like a caveman. This was all the confirmation I'd ever need. That was the last time I went to that property. I walked away from 3 very expensive hunting stands and multiple hog traps. I even left a backpack filled with gear, and that large beast can have it all. Nothing in this life is worth facing that thing again. This happened 9 years ago. Now I'm 51 years old, and I'm afraid of the dark. PTSD due to encounters with these giants is real. I've lived with it for 9 years. A lot was taken from me that night. I can only be grateful that I survived. Donnie Miller. You know, they say time heals all wounds, but when you hear about things like this that happen to more people than most would dare believe, and you get just a glimpse of the aftermath, you begin to see that time tends to kick their butt. And I wouldn't dream of disrespecting anyone that went through war. I understand the deep and lasting effect that can have on a person, but I believe these close encounters with monsters do equate. Alright, big thanks to Ben and Donnie for their contributions. It's never easy reliving a bad experience, but there is solace in believing your experience could help someone else. Donnie does have a YouTube channel. It's called Standing Goats Rescue. Be sure you check that out. I'll put a link in the description. There are some Bigfoot videos up there that he posts every now and then. Alright, thank you all for listening. Hope to see you back here next time for the Shudder.